Hello, I'm going to continue my read through of my book, The Baha'i Faith, A Short History. We've now reached chapter 8 on the Baha'i Communities up to 1921. As before, I'm dividing the presentation into two separate videos for ease of recording. We've got 5 topics in this chapter: Iran, the Ottoman Empire and Egypt, which we'll cover in the present video, and then India and Burma, Russian Turkestan and Caucasia, and the West, which we'll follow in the second video. So, to the text. Baha'u'llah clearly conceived of his religion as a universal creed, destined to spread in the course of time to the whole world. Therefore, a major theme in the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha was the need to teach the cause and expand both the number of believers and the religion's geographical spread. From the outset, the movement was imbued with a strong missionary ethos, and a widespread expansion was soon set in train. This expansion was concentrated in Iran, but also came to include the Caucasus from the 1860s, Egypt, again from the 1860s, India and Burma from the 1870s, Russian Turkestan from the 1880s, and North America and Europe from the 1890s. The idea of worldwide expansion was given special emphasis in Abdu'l-Baha's Tablets of the Divine Plan, which I talked about briefly in the previous chapter. The establishment of Baha'i communities in the West bore a particular significance as a major cultural breakthrough, indicating the potential universality of the Baha'i cause. Baha'i expansion in Iran initially built on the existing network of Babi groups, which had already been partly reanimated through the efforts of Baha'u'llah. Although in some towns there was a division into rival factions and even violence between Baha'i and Azali partisans, the majority of the Babi community became Baha'is within a few years of Baha'u'llah's first dispatch of missionary emissaries in 1866. Responding to a forceful charismatic leadership, the Babis, now Baha'is, displayed a ready zeal and resourcefulness in the consolidation and expansion of their community. They were effectively reborn as a religious force within Iranian society, a fact quickly recognized by both the state and Muslim authorities and by resident and visiting foreigners. We do not know the extent of the Baha'i expansion that followed. It is possible that by the 1880s their numbers were again in the region of 100,000, the same figure often given for the number of Babis before the movement had been crushed, and that 30 years later the numbers were almost certainly in excess of this. Most definitely, it is clear that contemporaries recognized the religion's dynamism at this time, and that a significant number of converts were made. These new Baha'is included men of considerable prominence, such as clerics, government officials, and even members of the Qajar family. From the 1880s, they also included substantial numbers of the Jewish and Zoroastrian minorities, though not of the Armenian and Assyrian Christian populations. Most significantly of all, the movement now appears to have undergone a process of what I've termed familiarization with the conversion and much fuller involvement of wives and daughters, and hence the assurance of effective socialization of Baha'i children and the continuance of the movement over time. There was also a wider circle of sympathizers and secret Baha'is, including, according to one account, Mirza Shirazi, the leading Shi'i divine of the age. Internal consolidation of the movement became increasingly effective, with the various local Baha'i communities being linked together by visits from leading Baha'is and the receipt of regular correspondence from Baha'u'llah delivered by itinerant Baha'i couriers. Prominent individual Baha'is were often given specific missions by Baha'u'llah, and in 1887-88, 4 were appointed as Hands of the Cause, and in time they played a key organizing role in what was increasingly a unified national Baha'i community. Although many of the Baha'i leaders at this time still came from a clerical background, including some of the new converts, non-clerics attained far more prominence than had been the case in the Babi community. The rising level of Baha'i activity could only provoke opposition from the ulama. Some local governors and clerics were protective of the Baha'is, but in many areas persecution became commonplace, with a number of instances of beatings and imprisonment and even murder, often by mobs stirred up by clerical sermons or execution. Of the executions, three were particularly noteworthy: of Mahdi, the youth who delivered Baha'u'llah's letter to Nasruddin Shah in 1869, and of two brothers who were leading Esfahani merchants in 1879. The execution of the merchants indicated that no Baha'i was safe, no matter how socially prominent. The brothers' execution is also significant in that, as was widely recognized at the time, religious motives were deliberately used to mask financial greed on the part of one of the leading local clerics, who was in debt to the brothers and the compliant governor. Henceforth, persecution often assumed a financial as well as religious raison d'etre, disguising either extortion or theft. As declared apostates, according to Shi'i sacred law, the Baha'is could be killed with impunity and their goods seized by pious Muslims. For their part, the Baha'is responded peacefully. As Baha'u'llah insisted, the days of Babi militancy were past. The often heroic fortitude of the Baha'is in these circumstances served to attract further converts, as well as the sympathetic attention of foreign diplomats and of some members of the governing elite. Wider knowledge of Baha'i, as opposed to Babi, beliefs spread through society. These are photographs of Baha'i prisoners during this period. On the left we have two of the hands of the cause, Haji Akhund and Haji Amin, and on the right the photograph includes the Baha'i poet Varqa and his son Ruhullah, the two figures on the left of the photograph. The situation changed under Abdu'l-Baha's leadership, in part because of increasing political and social unrest, which finally led to the collapse of the Qajar regime and the military intervention of the Russians and British. In this troubled period, it was extremely difficult to steer a stable course. Abdu'l-Baha continued Baha'u'llah's policy of emphasizing loyalty to the government, and under a new Shah, Muzaffar-ud-Din, who reigned from 1896 to 1907, there seemed to be real possibilities of securing protection for the community. Many Baha'is occupied important government positions at this time, including several provincial governorships. Unfortunately for the Baha'is, the Qajar regime itself was now increasingly ineffective, and the Baha'is became an easy target for displaced political discontent, several pogroms being organized against them. In the face of these difficulties, the Baha'is seem to have become more rather than less confident of the success of their mission. The increasing turmoil perhaps gave them a sense of the possibilities for the transformation of society and a sudden victory. If so, this was augmented by news of the successes of the faith in Turkestan and America, as well as by the arrival of a small number of American Baha'is to help with the establishment of Baha'i schools and a clinic. The progress of the Baha'i cause in the world was becoming palpable. This was also a period of administrative development within the Baha'i community. On Abdu'l-Baha's instruction, the Hands of the Cause in Tehran formed a consulting assembly in 1897 to advise and direct the Baha'is. This soon became a partly elected body, and a variety of committees were formed to manage activities ranging from child education to poor relief publishing and the adjudication of commercial disputes between Baha'is. Assemblies were also formed in other major Baha'i centers, the Tehran Assembly assuming the role of a central directorate. One important aspect of these developments was concern for the advancement of women, a separate assembly for Baha'i women being established in 1910. A Baha'i Benevolent Fund was also formed. From the 1860s onwards, small Baha'i groups were established in various parts of the Ottoman Empire and Egypt. Initially, these consisted almost entirely of Iranian expatriates. The potential vulnerability of these Baha'is was vividly illustrated during the 1860s by the arrest of Baha'is in Egypt and Baghdad and their exile to the Sudan and Mosul, respectively. A small number of Levantine Christians and Sunnis were converted, but in general missionary work was avoided in these areas, perhaps out of sensitivity for the effects this might have on the authorities' dealings with the Baha'i colony in Akka. This policy changed in Egypt in the 1890s when the distinguished Baha'i scholar Mirza Abul-Fazl established himself at Al-Azhar University, the leading seat of learning in the Muslim world. A number of conversions followed, and a small but dedicated community of indigenous Egyptian Baha'is came into being. So, many thanks for listening, and particularly thanks to my patrons, Ian Palin and Tricia Williams. If you like these videos, you're welcome to subscribe to my channel. I'll try to answer any questions you may have about the video in Patreon or in a future video. Those who want to support the development of the channel can do so through Patreon or PayPal. I'll give details below. Please also like the video if you did. Have a good day.